I am Robert, the CEO of Poll Everywhere. I really appreciate Keith and Tess and everyone at EventTech for letting me present today, even though I was unable to be in person. And here we go. So if you don't know Poll Everywhere, we're a remote first company these days. We were about 40% remote before the pandemic as well. So long experience in it. I, in fact, was never in the office. We've been around for about 15 years, and you can see some of the logos. We're trusted by the majority of R1 universities in the country, as well as much of the Fortune 500. And a little bit of a left turn. So I'm not in the space, and I don't know how well Vivox is going to work for me. And also, I'm the CEO of Poll Everywhere. So if you would indulge me and to use your device to go to pollev.com/Robert, I've got some activities here and some interactivity that we're going to use throughout, not just at the end or the beginning. So if you have questions, there's a way to submit those pinned in the background. And also, I'd just like to get a sense of everyone that's here. So we're going to start off and just find out where's home. I'll give everyone a second to get over to pollev.com/Robert. And myself, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I've been up here for about 6 years, and I really love it. I spent the afternoon in the forest. Looks like we had a couple of people on the West Coast, some perhaps Vegas. I know the map's quite large, but I didn't want to center America too much. It felt too American to me. Everyone, just another moment. One of the reasons we like to set up with a low stakes question like this is just to make sure everyone has time to engage. So I'll let everyone keep getting over to pollev.com/Robert, and we will get on to the purpose of the talk, which is what makes a successful meeting. So we'll start here and we'll end right here. And how can data help make a successful meeting? It's something we'll get to. But first, my purpose today is to teach you something new about running a successful virtual meeting. And that's my clear purpose. I think that's one of the things that you want in order to define a successful meeting is, to define success itself. So if you would, we can actually start right there together. What do all of you think makes a successful meeting? What defines a successful meeting? Give everyone a moment to reply, to give me a sense of where everyone is coming to. So we lead off with engagement. Insight, yeah, engagement's getting bigger. Actions, yeah, what can you do with something? Collaboration is obviously important at work. I'll let a few more of these come in. Ideas, alignment, bonding. Yeah, these are all important, and I would agree. And I also, since it's 2023, decided not to just ask the audience, but I also asked ChatGPT. So this is what ChatGPT thinks makes a successful meeting, which the biggest thing is just meeting. And one of the second biggest things is actually avoid. So I guess it's not too fond of it. But I think something that's interesting here to point out is things we're not going to cover today. So it has attendees and it has things about goals. And I'd recommend that you read Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering. It's actually over here on the shelf. I was able to throw it up behind me. And it's a great book. And if you want to hear more about having the right people or sticking to the agenda, that's a great place to get it. But today we're talking specifically about virtual meetings. And I want to focus on how you can connect and bring depth to those virtual meetings and why that connection is important. And if you ask ChatGPT, it actually thinks it's more important too. So this is changing the question. So not just what makes a meeting successful, but what makes a virtual meeting successful. ChatGPT will tell you that the participants are the number one thing. And the meeting itself has gotten smaller. I think this is pretty fascinating. And we think at Poll Everywhere that making your participants part of the story, part of your meeting, right, and not losing them, means that you have a shot at that goal that you began with. So I assume many of you have seen this, and maybe when you see this, it gets you to sit up a little bit straighter. And the idea here is that, we're also recording some data about these meetings. So in order to have this virtual meeting and to enhance it with data, we need to record some data. And there's a hazard here called the observer's paradox, in that when you go and observe something, it changes what you are observing. Right? Collecting data at meetings has the same impact. Still, a lot of times the things we track are the things that we improve, even if we don't necessarily have a goal for those things. So one example, I don't know if any of you have a watch on, I do, and it can track exercise, it can track things like calories burned and how often you're standing up. And even for folks without a specific goal for something about their fitness, it can impact their behavior in a positive way. They might stand up a little more. They might go for a walk more often. I know for myself, I know that at dinner in the evening, my kids will actually ask me how my rings are. And when I go up the stairs, I have to wonder, what am I going to say? Did I close those rings today? What should I go for a walk in the middle of the day? And so I think we're going to take it for granted that doing this measuring and collecting this data is just a positive thing that can have a positive impact, even though there are probably some cases where that doesn't hold. But let's talk about collecting data and building that engagement. So I can't see the audience, and this kind of illustrates my point today. It's interesting that I got to do this virtually. So you can ask folks to raise their hands, right? And it can be really effective in a room like this when you're present in a room like this. But speaking on Zoom, if I ask everyone in the room to raise their hand if they've been asked to raise their hand in a meeting, I really am not sure how many of you raised your hand in a virtual meeting. And of course, if I ask again later, I can't compare how many of you raised your hand. And if I ask something like, raise your hand if your birthday is in the first half of the year, I really don't know if half of you raised your hand or only one of you, and something odd went on. But raise your hand, it does buy you that engagement. Maybe everyone looks up from their phone, maybe everyone, starts to engage in a way that they weren't before. But you can't compare it to the last one. So just by bringing some of that engagement, it can also fall down in a context where perhaps someone's not in the room, and it greatly biases some of that engagement to the people that are in person. So yeah, the first thing, as we saw on the word cloud, is going to be engagement. If your meeting's about a particular goal, whether it's going to these mountains, right, a gathering, or Q3 sales performance, you need everyone engaged before you're going to be having any chance at that goal. Now, we're going to keep building on engagement. We're going to talk more about varied circumstances around where the raised hand will let you down a little bit. And I assume that you saw this slide and wondered where it went. And again, it's kind of lucky that I get to do this virtually because it's very common to feel a divide between a presenter and a virtual audience. I still can't see anyone. I'm looking into the void here in my basement. But you can build a bridge, and it helps you gain confidence to do so. The audience gains a voice. It makes them part of the story. And even in others that respond, if not everyone is responding, they can still see their own answer in someone else. And that makes a difference. We have a case study with the director of workplace innovation at this design firm, Hyphen, and they use this that way internally. They always break the ice, whether it's internal or external, and it creates insight for them into how things are going. So let's go there. How is this session going relative to your expectations? I assume that each of you saw the talk, you saw the speaker, you saw maybe the title, and you thought, maybe this is interesting, maybe this is just the last session you'll go to. But one thing I can say about how the talk is going, whether you really enjoy it or you maybe are disappointed, is that having a question like this shows some vulnerability, and it can be really connecting to do that. And you also have the opportunity to learn. If the talk isn't going well, and there were a lot of negative responses here, maybe that reflects something about how you were showing up as a speaker, what kind of content you had, or maybe, as we've observed a couple of times in the last couple of years, maybe it's really related to how your employees are showing up that day or your audience. You may have a situation outside of work that's impacted how people feel. It's important to bridge that gap, to maintain that engagement, and to know how people are showing up. It keeps us in touch, and it helps to know if things are going well or poorly, what your pace ought to be, what the outside impact might be. One of my colleagues had an awesome first day at Pull Everywhere. And this wasn't it, but this is him on a boat. That's Coop. And his great first experience was about surfacing voices. So not on a boat. He was actually in the back of a room. And he offered a question at an all company meeting. And a former CEO was standing up front. And Coop put this question in about a project we were collaborating on in that meeting. And it was in front of everyone. It was one of his first days. And the CEO answered the question live. He addressed it specifically. We talked around it a little bit, and we implemented exactly what Coop was trying to get at. And he never forgot how that felt and what a powerful tool that can be to raise up voices and connect people to what's going on in those spaces. One of the ways that we did that at Poll Everywhere was before the pandemic, we had something called a remote advocate for our hybrid meetings. And we created norms around when to turn your camera on and how someone that was in the space would pretend to be remote with headphones on, and they would signal to the room where it's easier to speak up quickly, in natural pauses when you're in the room with no latency. And they kind of level the playing field. And that's something that's important about virtual spaces, is to try to level that playing field. You want to make rules that serve your gathering's purpose. And the expectations can be different at different meetings. Maybe you have a sales training where you know that it's going to be in person. And so you want everyone to have their camera on. You want everyone to dress up. You want everyone to be prepared for exactly what they're going into. But perhaps you have a sales training that is about phone calls, right? With no virtual or visual input. And you want them to experience that in the call. Cameras off. Maybe you want to do a brainstorm and you want everyone to relax and go for a walk. You can build the rules of the game, of the gathering, around the outcome you're looking for. And that's something you can do in virtual spaces. So this is a takeoff on an old XKCD comic, but I didn't want to use their copyrighted comic. So, there might be some real problems with the idea of gravity soccer with a black hole in the middle here. But we should try things, even if not all of them work. And the point is to reimagine what we're doing in a virtual space to make sure that it serves what we want it to. This is FDR doing one of his famous fireside chats with the American people. And our company has a lot of introverts that don't always show up in live spaces in the way that you'd hope. If you want to get input from the most people, sometimes you have to offer other paths. So we offer a Q&A that we leave up for a few weeks, once a quarter, and we do a fireside chat with all the executives. And you can ask them anything you'd like. And I have an example here from one of our recent ones last October when we got together in person. And there are all sorts of things folks ask. They can ask really difficult questions about comp or about, how we value employees or benefits or, specific leadership decisions that we might be making. And we know that leaving this up for a couple of weeks changes entirely how the introverts engage with it and who gets to hear from those people in that space. And building that connection over time, doing this ritual, drives more interest in the rituals we do. So this is an example of our Q&A. If you haven't already, you can connect with it. You can go to pollev.com/Robert, and it is there in the background. So even if we're looking at another poll, we can always get to it. But let's talk a little bit about anonymity. So there is potential power in anonymity to connect people in spaces. Now, you may have a space with a certain amount of vulnerability to it. You may have low trust for some reason, or you could also have a situation where perhaps there's a big power differential and not everyone is confident about something like raise your hand if questions, right? Where everyone can see who raised their hand, how everyone answered. And it's pretty common that anonymity can actually add to connection. So when you see the answers on a screen, right, of some anonymous responses, it's incredibly connecting to know that other people are experiencing or have experienced what you did. And so using that as a tool is something that we've seen in a case study with a business coach, Tom Hamp. And he would do questions with companies like, what would you start, what would you stop, and what would you continue doing here? But he found that until he added that element of anonymity, that he really didn't get very good questions. The kind of engagement he got was lower quality. So this is one of the keys to walking away with those insights that came up in the first word cloud. So we talked a bit about engagement and bridging that virtual gap. We've talked now about how anonymity can add connection, how feedback and letting people speak up and elevating their voices can bring a more level playing field, can raise up those voices. And these are all unique opportunities that we can bring to these engagements virtually. Now, we haven't talked a lot about data, though even raise your hand if is a way to collect some data. We'd like to be able to keep the data, to compare it. In fact, that's one reason that today I've used Poll Everywhere, is that the next time I do a talk like this, I can compare the data. The Georgia Department of Transportation used Poll Everywhere, and specifically for post-event surveys, which was interesting. So not just in-person questions as we've gone through this talk, but also for surveys. So instead of sending someone a link after they leave the event, they would ask everyone to fill it out before they depart in a live session. And their fill rates were dramatically higher. And the point is that just having the data there is hugely impactful. Many more people and a much better sample of the data were present for the Department of Transportation to make those decisions about how to move forward. We saw a similar thing with Juan Cabrera, an HR business partner at Merck, Sharp, and Dohme, a very large company. And he wanted to get a sense of how people felt about the culture, how they felt about where the company was going, how they felt about well-being at the company, and had some struggles with traditional surveys, and ultimately gathered about 100 people on a live session and just went through the 30 questions he wanted to ask. And that engagement created just this fantastic level of interaction that he was unable to find in other venues and other ways. And one of the last things I'd like to talk about specifically on virtual meetings is to think about those small advantages you can have, like this larger snail. So the one thing I can point out is that there's no person next to you. So even me at home, I'm not necessarily looking at anyone, right? It's one advantage of looking into the void is that very undistracted. Now, anyone can be distracted by their phone, whether they're at home or at work, but you have an opportunity with a virtual meeting to make those phones part of the experience, make that laptop part of the experience. And you can create a space that's more like a movie theater that's quiet and no one has their phone out, but that you just get lost in the event itself. And I think that we've gotten out of the habit of doing that in person, but it's one of those things where you can change the rules and try to create that space in your virtual meetings. So I said we'd start here and that we would end here. And we can talk a bit more. We have some questions, right? But we're going to reflect. So what is a successful meeting? What is a successful virtual meeting? And yeah, we're going to just pause for a moment and see if anybody has shifted anything. Do we see the same thing here? Or do people perhaps have some ideas that we've missed? And that's a way that you could collect those thoughts now, right? Toward the end of something. Did we miss something? Give everyone a moment. Have a few minutes left here. Honesty, direction, anonymity, data. Yeah. These are all, again, excellent examples of things that can make a virtual meeting successful. And this shift that we see in the word cloud is a snapshot of what we accomplished here together. So I may have had some influence on you. You may have had some influence on each other and the activities that we did. And I get to benefit from listening and also from having the data to compare. Was that first word cloud, did it have higher engagement than the latter one? Did we lose some people somewhere? Of course, we can use that kind of information to adjust, right? We can have this talk, we can do it again, and maybe we should change the approach. This kind of fell off. Or maybe we had some objectives. Maybe there were some words we wanted to see in that latter word cloud that we didn't see. We can use that as well. So that connects our data and our history to our engagement, to bridging this virtual divide, to our connection and feedback. So if you know, for example, that like your onboarding process last year had higher feedback, higher connection all the way through, then you can change this year's version and really have a bit more impactful presentation. And that's one of those big things you can use data for, even if it's anonymous data. So I hope that you walked away with at least one new thing on how you can make your virtual meetings better. And with that, we can get to a couple of questions. I believe that we have 3 or 4 minutes.
Yes, Robert, we do have a question from the audience. This is Tess.
Oh, thank you, Tess. Please.
What? I don't have a question. What question am I supposed to ask him? No, I don't. Just anything about virtual. Am I supposed to ask?
What if I'm actually asking polls, do you as Poll Anywhere help me create the best poll questions for my audience? Like, do you have a library of poll questions, or is it I have to go for it on my own? Especially when you talk about it's all in how you ask the question to get the data that you want. And if you don't ask the question appropriately, you may not get really what you need. So since you all are experts in that, I'm just wondering, do you have a poll library?
We do. We do have a library. We do have some default polls and a wide variety of poll types. But a lot of our presenters also find that over time they kind of adapt things from the library to suit a specific circumstance. And there are other places to get inspiration for things like survey questions, which are extremely like high bar for design on survey question to make sure that you're not leading people into particular types of answers. So that's a very good question. It can be hidden that it's very important to get those questions right.
I have one more question. A group that I'm going to have remain nameless helped devise a rating for our industry that was centered around return on emotion. And I'm just interested to see, we're so focused on ROI, right? But have you seen in all of the polls that you have kind of had an opportunity to, observe and see what was successful, anything that really truly gets to the feeling of, how someone's experience or engagement was versus just the hardcore number facts?
I think, we do a retro like this Q&A in all of our biweekly town halls, so our all company meetings. And I think that all of my years at Poll Everywhere, that has been one of the more rewarding activities. And it's more often because of the positive energy that people put into it and the way that people feel like, they really have a voice in that space. Even when we were hybrid, some in office and some not. So it is harder to get, data on something like a return on emotion. But I think it's easy to see. We've hired some new folks in the last year or so, and it's really rewarding. We had a team event in LA last week, and to see them interact with the product in person for the first time, it was really kind of a light bulb moment. And I think it was clear to see, oh, this is really engaging. This really matters. People are much more engaged in these activities when you create space for them to be part of it rather than, party to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Robert at all? We don't have any other here on the floor for you, Robert. Anything
Okay.
else? Anything else you'd like to share your words of wisdom with us?
Well, I will say a number of tools, Poll Everywhere included, that can help with anonymity in virtual settings. A lot of tools have those settings. And we do have a very high bar for security, including a number of certifications, a lot of enterprise trust. But I do believe we are about out of time. So I just have to say thank you to EventTech Live, to Tess and Keith, for allowing me to present today.
Well, we are so happy to have you, and always the show must go on. So thank you for being very flexible and coming to us remotely. Thank you.
Thank you.